Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently, is a quote from Warren Buffett. American investor, business tycoon, philanthropist, and the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. I thought this was an appropriate quote for our guest today. The chairman of an investment house, one of the few companies that has been successfully managed by the same family from the outset, having built their reputation for more than 100 years. Our guest, representing the fourth generation, is Robert Millner, chairman of Washington H. Soul Pattinson and Company Limited. Having been listed in 1903, the company is the second oldest publicly listed company on the Australian Securities Exchange. Robert is also chairman of Brickworks, BKI Investment Company, Milton Corporation, New Hope Corporation, and a director of Apex Healthcare Berhad, TPG Telecom, and Twice Limited. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Limitations, a show where we speak to elite world-class performing men and women and unlock the secrets and influences that have shaped their destinies and that you could apply to your own life. For our first-time listeners and followers from all over the world, please don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. And for our listeners in the United States, Malaysia, and Sweden, a big hello. I am your host, Greg Robinson, managing partner of Blendon Partners, the #1 research-led executive search and board advisory firm. In this episode, we gain insights and cover the experiences of one of Australia's doyens in the investment industry and the broader business landscape. From joining as a director at a young age, maintaining the legacy and market reputation, never failing to pay a dividend to shareholders, and on to what the future holds. With investments across manufacturing, property, mining, bulk handling, pharmaceuticals, and telecommunications, Robert talks about the savviness required to navigate different and complex business environments all over the world, and affords us a glimpse into the mind of someone known for his ability to turn bargains into big returns. So sit back and enjoy. Pressure is a made-up word. Robert, welcome to the show.
Well, nice to be here, Greg. Thank you.
Where did you grow up, Robert?
I'm a Sydney boy, born and bred, till when I was about 9. My parents, well, the family before my parents, bought a family property, and then a couple of years later my father bought a property at Cowra, and I was already at school at that stage at Newington College. So born in Sydney and spent most of my life as a postal address at Cowra.
Okay. Because I read during your life you spent a fair bit of time in the bush. That's obviously, that's the DNA, is it?
Yeah. As I said, I went to school down here.
Yep.
Obviously, when I finished my HSC, I have no tertiary background. I went and worked with a stockbroker for a while.
Okay.
And that was a very interesting time. Actually, it was during the Poseidon boom.
Oh, wow.
So sort of late 68, 69. So that was very exciting.
Yep. Make some good money as a stockbroker?
I was very young and naive in those days.
Yeah. Now, why did you leave that and go back to the bush?
I guess being at school after we bought those properties and boarding school and only sort of having limited time in the country, I sort of had an inkling I wanted to go back. And we just bought another property at that stage, so that was exciting.
What's on the property?
The original one that I'm talking about is all cattle, and we just grow a bit of winter forage there. But in the last 10 or 15 years, I bought quite a large agricultural area down on the Lachlan River at Cowra, which is irrigated. So
now, Mr. Jim Millner,
sounds
like he was pretty impactful in your life.
He was my uncle.
Mm-hmm.
He was an amazing man.
Okay.
He was a POW in Singapore. Fortunately, he was an officer, and he didn't go on the death march.
Okay.
And came back. A very hardened man. I think he was pretty hard before he went. He was a front row forward. So he used to put newspaper down for his shin pads.
Is that right?
So he came back even hungrier and tougher than when he went away. He's been a great mentor for me.
Mm-hmm.
Gave me a lot of advice. He was the one that asked me to come back in 1984 if I'd like to sit on the board of Soles, which in those days you obviously asked. I often thought it would have been nice someone else to continue the Pattinson, because I'm the fourth generation Pattinson chairman, and my son Tom is also sits on the board now, so he's the fifth. So there's a lot of history there.
What is the history, Robert? Where did it all begin? Because it's such
my
a well-known business.
Great-great-grandfather, who was Louis Pattinson, which is the Pattinson name,
mm-hmm.
he came out in the 1860s. And actually the first Pattinson pharmacy was in 1872. And then in those early days, everybody knew everybody, and he became very friendly with Caleb Sole.
Yeah.
He had a son called Washington, and Caleb wanted to sell out, and he didn't think his son was up to it.
All right.
So it shows you what a great man old Louis was. He incorporated the name into the company, which is Washington 8 Sole Pattinson. So that was listed in 1903.
1903.
Yeah.
Success year after year. You're out in the bush and Jim calls you to say, come and join the board.
Yeah.
Big call.
Going back when I was in my early teenage years, we used to have a family meeting in Canberra every year. And, all of my uncles and aunts and grandparents. My grandmother was a Pattinson, and obviously my grandfather was a Millner.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great man. He went to Gallipoli, came back, didn't know what he wanted to do after the First World War, met his wife was May, who's my grandmother, and came out to Australia after and started up a company called CIG, Consolidated Industrial Gases, which was listed. So he was a great man in his own right, and he gave a lot of guidance, and he was a big influence on my life as well.
So from early on, you were always going to make a career in business?
I wouldn't say that, but I was always interested in it. Things were pretty. You got to remember going back in those eras, it was pretty primitive. There wasn't a lot of money around.
No.
It wasn't until the sort of late 80s, early 90s, and I go back and relate now to when Commonwealth Bank and CSL floated.
Yep.
And had property prices explode and these sorts of things, and the wealth that's been created since those late 80s. Through to now, it's staggering.
So when you go back all those years and they come out and chat to you, but you had been to the dinner table in discussion for many years before that, what were you learning, Robert? What was the fundamentals of business you took on board?
Well, obviously the family had large equity holdings.
Yep.
So I was always, keen on shares.
Yep.
And the first thing that Jim said to me, he said, when you join the board, just sit there for the first few meetings and shut up and don't ask any dumb questions.
Good advice.
Well, it's very appropriate.
So what is the business? Sole Patch. You want to talk us through what do you guys do?
We're called a lot of things, from an investment house to a conglomerate.
Yep.
We're very unusual. We're the only one of our type which is listed on the market. As I mentioned, we've been around since 1903 and a listed entity. Never missed paying a dividend since 1903, through the Depression years, the war years, up until recently. Since the GFC, we're the only company that's been able to increase their dividend since the GFC. So there's a lot of a very proud track record there of rewarding our shareholders over a long period of time.
The philosophy, it's all long term?
Yeah, you have to think long term. For example, if you build a brick plant, it's going to run for 40 or 50 years. A coal mine, it runs for a long period of time. With telecommunications. So most of our business is pharmacy. Yep. Most of our businesses are long-term focused.
Is that how you choose your business?
Yeah, when we look at a business, we've got very very low overheads. We've only got less than 20 people in the head office.
Okay.
So we need to pick good people. And I think that's been our track record over a long period of time. It's been able to pick the right people. We haven't always. We've made mistakes like everybody. But unless you've got good people, to me, you don't get very far. And when you look at a business, it's got to generate cash. And that's one of the reasons why we've been able to keep paying our dividends, because we've got good cash-generating businesses.
Do you look for businesses which are distressed when you acquire?
Well, obviously that was one of the early things that Jim focused on, was always have cash, because when there's a downturn, you move. When others are hurting, you're there to. And it's not a good way of doing business, but that's life. When people are suffering, if you've got cash or credit, you can move very quickly. And I can remember in the GFC paying $22 for Macquarie Bank, $27 for Commonwealth Bank. Commonwealth Bank have returned more than $27 in dividends since that time. So we were able to do those sorts of purchases. TPG, I think, got down to 14 cents. They're $7 now.
You're in coal?
Yep.
Telecoms?
Yep.
Pharmacy?
Yep.
Okay, so we've got TPG.
Yep. Which is now joined with Vodafone.
So what's going to happen there?
Unfortunately, due to the ACCC, we're 2 years behind Telstra and Optus.
Yeah, right.
They've got a huge jump on us because they've been able to build up their network. But it's a good business. We've been very badly hurt, I must admit, in the last period of time with COVID.
Yeah.
$90-odd million loss of income just in SIM cards from foreign students and overseas travellers.
Yeah, right.
These are the sort of things that people don't realise what's happening at the moment. But it's a very, very good cash-generating business.
Yeah, and what about coal?
Coal is very good. Again, New Hope's returned us over $1 billion in special dividends.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dirty word at the moment, but Australia has the cleanest coal in the world. People don't realise 14% of the world don't have running water or power. 14%. So we have all these people running around in Australia. We've got to close coal-fired power stations. We can't build gas-fired power stations. A sixth of the world are not in our position. They haven't got shelter over their heads. They haven't got running water and haven't got power.
So, Robert, you're in it for the long term then with coal?
Yeah. We've been very badly hamstrung at the moment by the Queensland government.
Yeah.
We have a mine up there called Acland. There's been coal mining up there for 90 years. We had an application in to go from 5 million tonnes to 7.5 million tonnes to 10 million tonnes, and that's been knocked back by government. We've received all the legal ticks.
Yes.
But we're still waiting approval from the Queensland government. We've been laying off people, and unless we get some acknowledgement from the Queensland government in the next few months, by the end of October, we'll have to close it down. So there'll be hundreds of people out of work.
It's an enormous loss.
Massive loss. But it's a National Party electorate.
So what's happening out there then? What do you think of the discourse when it really comes to talking about long-term policy for this country?
We've got to think long-term. Not many things happen overnight. You build a freeway or Transurban build a motorway or an airport. They're there for decades. There's too much short-term focus everywhere instead of, to me, long-term focus of what's the next generation or what are my grandkids going to inherit.
It's a real worry, isn't it?
Oh, it's a massive worry. And now we've got this massive amount of debt around the world that someone's got to pay back to somebody. We're very lucky we're in a very, very low interest rate environment. But, as soon as interest rates will go up, but the experts are saying not for a while, but there seems to be always something that triggers something that reacts down the track, and all of a sudden the stock market's fallen over or stock market's gone up or interest rates have come down or interest rates have gone up. Something triggers it somewhere that I hope it doesn't happen, but COVID came out of the blue, didn't it?
Yeah. Rapid.
Yeah.
Well, what'd you learn through COVID?
I learned after 6 weeks being locked up at home, up in the country, that I needed to get back to work.
Hang around the bend.
But no, I'm a great believer at looking at people across a table and just looking at the colour of their eyes. I find it very difficult to do these Zoom meetings, Microsoft meetings, etc. And when you hear some of the surveys that some of these big companies are doing, when you've got 20 or 30% of the workforce says they do not want to come back to work I think that's a frightening statistic.
A lot of them are saying yes to it, Or do you think it's
Well-
lip service? What do you reckon? I reckon it's a massive debate about to happen here, because if you look at the history of some of these technology companies who are promoting a lot of this, they were built out in Western California, away from the major cities, where everybody went there all day, had lunch there, et cetera, et cetera. Now they're telling us we dial in or stay in contact via home.
Oh, there's no doubt there's been an amazing change in technology. Without that technology, we couldn't do it. But I think one of the biggest problems, and particularly people in the CBDs have got, is people in lifts. With the COVID of, one people, or it was 1.4, now it's sort of 2 square metres. So I think that's one of the big problems that the multi-big companies have faced. But I know Commonwealth Bank are trying to get back to 65% of their workforce back in the...
It's all about quick decision making too, isn't it? And engagement and even mental.
Well, you look at a young person who starts at, say, at one of the banks I mentioned, Commonwealth Bank.
Yep.
Comes in and is mentored by people that have been in that office for 10, 15, 20 years, giving great advice to these young ones. They're not getting any of that at the moment. They're missing out on that. So I would think there'd be a lot of young ones starting up, working from home, sort of feeling a bit lost. I can't go and ask somebody something, or go and have a cup of tea with them and a chat about this or about that. I think it's very disturbing.
Are we in a good business environment?
It's strange when you're out and about. Some businesses are doing very well, and other businesses are really struggling. Lindsay Partridge and I, who's the managing director of Brickworks, we went to Tassie 3 weeks ago. We went to Adelaide 2 weeks before Christmas, and then last week we flew from Sydney to Cairns, and then Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, and then a day and a half in Brisbane. And they are hurting up in the north. They're just not getting the travellers.
What was your thought regarding the announcement about the half-price fares?
Well, it's got to help. It's got to help. They are really bleeding up there, and that's their livelihood in North Queensland is tourism. And unfortunately, we've had these borders being closed. We're in 151 at Clarence Street, and there's 9 businesses there nearly this time last year. There's 4 there now.
Is that right?
Yeah. I shudder to think what's happening in Melbourne.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that's the case, what's happening in Sydney. And then again, you can't buy a new car, or you can't get a second-hand car. I know out in the rural property, trying to get parts for machinery, etc. It's
incredibly difficult. Is this the time, Robert, that government should actually look at a lot of opportunity in regards to business policy, tax reform, etc.? Why? Because cheap flights are great. That's a short-term stimulus, right? But that's not getting young people to start thinking creative about creating new businesses, etc. Like, what do you think?
As you said, Greg, at the end of the day, we've got to employ people. Employ people, pay tax. So the more people you've got working, the more tax the government receives. And I know you're going to ask me some questions about America later, and I'll give you some staggering figures on the cost comparisons between us and America.
Go on, do it now.
Energy costs. We are 3 times more expensive in energy. And obviously when you cook bricks or make bricks, you need gas at over 1,100 degrees.
Yeah.
3 times more expensive. Labour is two-thirds cheaper.
2/3 cheaper.
Well, sorry, a third cheaper than what it is here.
Yeah.
A lot more flexibility. Petrol prices are very expensive. And the second time Lindsay and I went over there, we had a request from government officials from Pennsylvania, come and talk to us. They said, Mr. Millner, Mr. Partridge, how can we help you? I said, sir, I've never heard anything like this in Australia. I said, we get headbutted in Australia. Every time we go and get a process, we get rebucked. How can we help you, sir? He kept saying. What can we do for you to make your business more successful in America?
So the willingness to open up and do business.
Yeah, they're open for business. And I think half the time we're closed for business.
Yeah, do you really believe that? Are we really closed? Is there too much red tape?
Well, we can import bricks cheaper from Europe than we can from Perth by boat. Tell me how that works. Because the coastal shipping unions. And a container ship comes in from Singapore. It can't go Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney. It's got to go to one of the others and go back again.
That's right.
And we've got no flexibility in our labour force. And I think our taxation is out of kilter. If I was had anything to do with it, I'd be putting the GST up.
You would?
I think the average around the world's 18%. We're 10%.
Yep.
And reduce our taxes so people are more incentivised to spend.
Why aren't we hearing this from business? Come on, why is it so quiet out there? Because this is an opportunity as a nation to come together and be smarter, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's all Band-Aid stuff at a lot of the time.
Well, that's right. Yeah. It's difficult to be in the position. The Business Council try and push causes through, but you've only got to watch people on the debating in Parliament. They don't talk about much. It's all sort of trivia, really. What they're debating, they should be debating how we can get this country going again, and the infighting between the federal government and the state governments. The federal health minister told everybody not to shut the borders, and the state government shut them. So it's very difficult.
So how do you place big bets like you do when they're so volatile at the moment? That's got to be the $64,000 question.
Well, first of all, you've got to make sure you do your due diligence properly. That's the most important thing. And then if you're looking at something, you've got to look at the people.
Yep.
And to me, a company's got to have a good finance team.
Is that what you're looking for, eh?
Unless at the end of the day, put it simply, what you're spending and what you're earning.
Yep.
You've got to have a good financial, and that applies to a board. Yeah. One of the most important positions on a board is the person who's chair of the audit committee. Again, you've got to know your numbers.
When you go back to what you said earlier, you said one of the big successes or strengths is your ability to choose the right team or the right leaders, presenting.
Yeah.
What do you look for? Because there must be terrifically good salespeople coming out to pitch to you all day long, isn't there?
Yeah, I think a great lesson I've learned over a long period of time is when you look at someone's CV, if they've moved around, if in the last 10 years they've had 3 or 4 jobs, you've got to think, well, how long is this person going to stay here? There's a lot of people moving.
Yeah.
I know they're chasing a rainbow, but stability, unless you've got stability, and I've always been a great believer in promoting from within.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, you've got to start at the bottom of a business, and this is, for example, I know I'm using Brickworks a bit as an example, but
yep.
We've got a great base. We've got a small operation in Tasmania,
yep.
So we send someone down there that we think's going to make it, and then if he does well, then he'll end up in Adelaide or Perth, and then he's got other opportunities. So you've got to start at the bottom and learn your business. And again, as I said earlier, it's all about good people.
What about the boardroom? That's up for discussion every day of the week at the moment, the composition.
Yeah. Again, I know one of the points there, I don't know whether we're going to talk about it now or later, but you said you've had quite a few directors talking about, are we talking about the business enough in a board meeting, or
was it corporate governance?
Or are we ticking a box? And to me, we're ticking too many boxes. At the end of the day, we've got to make sure our staff get home in the same state as they came to work. So the safety is very important. But we don't want to spend all day on it, and we don't want to spend all day on ESG and governance and risk. And I think in 10 years' time, or maybe even less, we might struggle to get good people to sit on a board, because do you want to be put through what some people have been put through?
No, because the money, the money doesn't pay. The workload's pretty high.
Oh, that's right.
And then you get torn apart in the back page by certain journalists.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So my great-grandfather, Louis Pattinson, he said I should never have floated the company.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is back in 1903.
Imagine if he was around now.
He wouldn't. I know, Jim. We used to have annual meetings. Used to go for 10 minutes.
Is that right?
Yeah. And annual reports used to be about 20 pages.
What goes on today? For those out there listening that are coming through, the entrepreneurs out there, maybe one day want to float the business or contemplate it, what goes on in the boardroom today?
Well, I think you've got to have the first thing you've got to do is when you make a decision, you've got to have consensus. You can't have it divided. It's like a football team or any sort of a team. Your board is a team. You've got to have a team that sticks together and thinks the same way. And there's some very, very good people. We're very lucky. We've got some excellent, both men and women on our boards. And they joined the board originally to talk about telecommunications or brick making, or if they're on the board of Sols, all our different investments, et cetera, or API's pharmacy. As I said, now we seem to getting bogged down, and a meeting might go for 4 hours, and your audit meetings and risk meetings and REM meetings and all these things are taking half the time.
And adding very little to the actual outcome for the business.
Well, they're a necessity. We all need to do it. We're all very conscious of ESG, and we've got to leave the earth in a better place than when we came. And 99% of the people are doing it. And as I said before, we've got to make sure our staff are safe and well looked after. But you've only got a limited time each month. The business is the one that pays the checks.
Do you have too many meetings, Robert?
I don't think we do.
Oh, you don't?
No, I think some companies have. It's very interesting. I find it quite interesting at the end of the financial year when I start getting all the annual reports, and I try and read most of them because we've got, particularly with the investment companies, and Soul's has got quite a large equity portfolio as well.
Yeah.
Seeing what some people are paid for 5 or 6 meetings a year.
Yeah. Bit extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think the other thing going back to boards is directors have got to be very conscious of they're not the manager of the business. We're there to set strategy. We're always happy to give advice. And I think you're quite often former managing directors and CEOs join a board, and I've seen it happen quite often, and they were quite offended if directors asked too many questions. But as soon as they get on the board, they're the ones that want to fire the bullets.
Can't let go, right? What's the story behind New Hope?
That's an interesting story. New Hope, we actually used to call it No Hope. It was an underground operation in Ipswich. And people, my generation and older, will know that there was a lot of coal came out of that area because Swanbank Power Station virtually was the power for Queensland. It ran Queensland. It was a big power station. So we got involved. Frank Robinson, who was a stockbroker with Patrick Partners, he was the one that bought it to Jim. And Frank had a son, Graham, who was a very, very good operator. And he went to Indonesia and married the Sultan of Yogyakarta's granddaughter, which opens doors in those parts of the world. So we ended up developing the Adaro coal mine, which is when we sold it, was doing 25 million tonnes of coal a year, a massive project. We built a coal terminal, and in that period of time, a bit like what we just went through 6 or 8 months ago, the price of coal collapsed. So Souls used to own 60% of New Hope, and the only reason we owned 60% of New Hope was because when we were developing those assets in Adaro in Indonesia, prices were I think we were getting $19 a tonne in those days for coal.
Yeah, right.
And of course the banks wouldn't lend any money. So every time we needed money, Souls was issued equity in New Hope. So that's how we owned 60% of New Hope at one stage. And then as we got developing, and I'll just go back a step, the reason why we got Adaro was a 30-year mining contract. But after 10 years, it had to be 50.1% owned by Indonesians.
Oh, okay.
So we had some Indonesians as shareholders, and then the Asian meltdown came, and they fell over like bloody drumsticks. One bloke was doing business in Russia, and another bloke was doing it. So anyway, then we eventually got a good partner, and things picked up, and then someone came along and offered us $500 million. So it was getting very difficult to do business. We couldn't do business like that over there now. They loved US dollars. Yeah, right. And there's no way you could do that sort of business now. So we bought $500 million back here to Australia, and we put that money into Ackland and paid a nice little special dividend to shareholders. As I said, New Hope's paid out over $1 billion in special dividends alone. And now we own 80% of probably the lowest cost thermal coal mine in Australia, which is Bengala. But again, early this year when everything else fell over, coal was $52 a tonne. It's $88 at the moment, US dollars a tonne. People forget how quickly commodity prices recover from the depths. Copper's well over $4 a pound. It hasn't been that for a long time. It was $2.20, $2.30 6 or 8 months ago.
So what's the future for coal? In all honesty, where are we going?
Well, as I said, 14% of the world hasn't got power or running water, and they're still building these high-energy, low-emission coal-fired power stations. They're going to run for 40 or 50 years. China's, I just haven't got the figures on the top of my head at the moment, but they're still building a massive number of these coal-fired powers, and our coal is the cleanest in the world. So if people are fair income, they'll approve our coal. I don't know whether anyone ever watches that CNBC program. Sometimes they have a shot of Hong Kong, you can't see it.
Yeah.
Because of the pollution.
Yeah, that's right.
But we've got the cleanest coal in the world. And gas. People are anti-gas at the moment as well. Like, we're all in favour of renewables, but they're never going to heat a brick kiln at 1,100 degrees.
So if we look at where the policy debates are going, are we in a really good chance of actually having very limited power and putting ourselves in jeopardy?
I think we will, yeah. Because the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time, and you've got manufacturing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have that pretty soon, right? Like you say, price of energy is ridiculous, right?
That's right. And what happens in the middle of January when, well, I'm saying people are on holidays, but at the end of January people come back from work.
Turn the air conditioning
It's a
on.
hot day and everybody turns out up at Penrith where we know it gets very hot, turns their air conditioning on at the one time. I'm a great believer. You know, we're bringing in roof tiles now from Europe.
Yeah, okay.
Which have solar panels in them.
This is Brickworks?
Yeah.
Okay.
And to me, all these new houses now, I know I'm sound as I'm pushing my own product, but these houses should have these roof tiles on them, even if you run your own hot water out of your own house. Like all these things all add up. I don't think anyone's against renewables, but I think there's a place for everything going forward. The world's done so well because we've had cheap energy. The world wouldn't be in this position now if we didn't have cheap energy.
You going to buy any more coal assets then?
Everything's for sale at a price. Well, we'd look at something. Yeah.
Long term, you reckon we're still there?
Well, as I said,
I'm not disagreeing with you. A lot of people won't say what you're saying, Robert. They're too scared to say it.
I know. I keep saying to people, if they don't like what New Hope's doing, sell your shares.
Fair enough. Brickworks, expanding into the US.
Yeah.
And as you said, you've been well received.
Yes.
What have you learned from going into the US? They good workers? Are they up on technology? They're behind the technology?
The business that we bought, the brick-making business, is very fragmented. There's a lot of particularly smaller players there. They haven't spent the money on the plants, mainly because labour's been so cheap. Most of the plants there have very little automation.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Because, for example, they're getting the Mexicans and these cheap labour, right. And most of it, they're still doing hand stacking and these sorts of things. But the scale, it's a massive market. And where we are in Philadelphia is close to the eastern coast, the New Yorks, those sorts of places. Mm-hmm. Whereas anyone that's been over there will, if you remember, there's a lot of brick, not only housing but universities and buildings.
Yes,
are all built in brick. And if you build an apartment in New York 30 years ago, and you need to replace, you've got to use the bricks from where they came from. So we're the largest player in that area. So I think we'll do well over there over time.
When you're assessing your investments and your companies you've invested in, how far ahead are you thinking, Robert? Because it's hard to make decisions based on the information and the world changing so rapidly these days. How do you take the big bet?
Well, we've got some very good people within Soul Pattinson and our Pitt Capital Partners, which is our investment bank.
Yeah.
And Todd Barlow, who used to run that, is now managing director of Souls. He's on top of everything. He's a very, very smart young man.
Yep.
And we've got some very good people in there. You go back to America. Lindsay worked with CSR over in America. Yeah, right. So he knew how it worked. So, and we did a lot of DD on it before we bought it. And that's, again, going back, looking at these investments, you've got to spend time and money and making sure your due diligence is right. A lot of people come unstuck, going in a bit gung-ho, and once you put the money down, you can't get it back again.
Can't get it back. What's the story behind TPG? How did you guys get access to those shares? There's a story there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, long story. I don't want to bore everyone, but for 5 minutes. Kevin Parry owned an NBN TV station when people can remember Christopher Skase and Alan Bonnan buggering up Channel 7 and Channel 9. Yep. He was doing the same thing with NBN at Newcastle, which was a Channel 9 affiliate, the highest rating TV station in Australia. A helicopter used to go up for lunch every day. When we bought it, the helicopter used to cost $800 an hour to run it. So,
Expect nice lunches.
and the grog. So we bought that, $38 million. And in a distressed state, when, as I said, after Skase and Bond had devastated 7 and 9.
Okay.
And then a few years later, TV stations are very good cash generators. So a few years later, digital TV comes in. So we arrive up there and management tell us it was going to cost us $30 million to go digital. We sort of all jumped and looked at each other. And then they thought about it. And when we sit at home watching our TV, very rarely do you lose picture or lose power. So we owned all our own transmitters and translators from Gosford to the Gold Coast and then out to places like Tamworth and Scone, etc., etc.
Yep.
And then mobile phones came in and technology for phones came in.
Yep.
So to spread the coverage, we spent $30 million going from Gosford to Sydney and the Gold Coast to Brisbane. In the meantime, Commundico was spending $270 million to go from Melbourne to Brisbane via inland. They put a cable in. So once we hooked that up and got going, then we went out to places like Tamworth and again Scone, etc. And then we did a deal with Wind Television. So that took us all the way from Cairns all the way to Melbourne. And, of course, we pushed out into places like Wagga and those bigger centres, Toowoomba, etc., etc.
Yep.
And then we started a telecommunications company, again because of our network, etc. And then we bought Commundico, went broke. We paid $27 million for them. So that gave us all this massive fibre. And then when James Packer sold off Nine to the private equity group, Jim and Kerry had an agreement because it was the biggest rating station for Channel 9. If you ever wanted to do anything, we'd come and talk to him and we'll take it off you. So I spoke to James and they took that as part of the private equity deal. So that we got $250 million for that. This is all on a $38 million investment. And then we floated off SP Telemedia into the public arena, which we owned a large shareholding in. And that's now our interest in TPG, worth $7 billion. So it all started from a $38 million investment.
Question for you, Robert. As a director and as chair, how much do you really need to know about each of these different businesses that you're involved in?
I quite often say to people, I can't become an expert on anything, but I need to know quite a bit about quite a few things.
What do you need to know about then?
Well, obviously you've got to keep you've got to try and learn a bit about technology and pharmacy, which I've grown up with.
Yep.
Coal mining, that's been an experience, and how to make bricks. And now we're branching out into some other businesses.
And be a quick study, I guess, and a good judge.
Well, again, it's all about people. When we bought NBN, I couldn't send anybody up there to run it. In those days, we had 10 people on the head office.
Yeah, right.
And excellent people, good people, but just buggered around by the guy from the West.
Then you made some calls after that, I guess.
Yeah. And then we were very lucky to get involved with David Teo,
Yep.
who I think is probably the best telecommunications person in Australia.
What's he like?
He's very, very smart. Yeah. Very private person, a lovely man. And,
so where's the future there? Are you guys going to become number one?
We've got the lowest cost of production again, and we've got the best backhaul, but we're 2 years behind. The ACCC cost us 2 years. So we've got to build infrastructure. We'll get there. I think we've got a good product.
Pharmacy. What's going on in that space?
It's been a frustrating business.
Oh, is it?
We used to own we were basically in New South Wales. We had our own retail, wholesaling and manufacturing. And for years, Sigma had wanted to do something, and Symbian had wanted to do something with us, and then API as well. And then eventually API made an offer that was a bit hard to refuse, so we ended up doing a deal and holding 25% of API. We still own 20% of it, but it's I've been trying to get some rationalisation in I'm not on the board anymore, but trying to get some rationalisation there. That's it's a high volume, low margin business.
Yep.
But I've been unable to get other people to listen because I think there's a lot of advantages there to be taken out with costs.
For all those people out there who are young business people, what's a good return, Robert? You're taking all this risk.
Yeah.
You're going to acquire that business. You're going to go A, B, C, and Co. What's the minimum top return you'd take a bet on?
It's always, we like to aim for 15. 15's a target you'd like to get, but you don't get that all the time. If you can achieve that, you'll do very well.
Okay, it's all about repaying the dividends, right?
Well, as I said, we need to have good businesses that one's going to generate good profits and good cash.
You also go to the States pretty regularly, from what I can gather, to go and see Mr. Buffett. What's that all about?
That is an unbelievable. In a place called Omaha, they use the basketball stadium, which holds 40,000 people, and then they have this massive hall, which, I don't know, be 2 or 3 football fields.
Yeah, right.
With all representatives from all their different businesses. And anyone who knows Berkshire Hathaway, the number of businesses they have, from railroads to candy stores to, caravans, and they actually own a brick business. It's the scale. The scale is just staggering, And the thing is, with Berkshire Hathaway, they don't pay dividend. So you just sit down and work it out. If you make $100 million this year, you reinvest that $100 million. Next year it's probably worth whatever. It's just compounding. Where if we over here earn $100 million, a lot of people paying 50, 60, 70% out in fully franked dividends. So you can see how by doing that, how he's been able to compound his returns. And they're two men. One's 88 and one's 94. They're staggering. I'm very sorry I couldn't go this year, and we won't be going this last year. We won't be going this year because sooner or later, unfortunately, one of them will, won't be with us. But
what do you pick up most on? Is it their intelligence gathering? Is it their gut feel? Well, how do they come to these conclusions to make these? Like you say, they're unbelievably partnership.
He's got billions of dollars sitting in the bank. Like, he's almost at the scale now where he can't do anything to shift the dial.
Yeah, right.
And he was very, very smart buying the insurance business because that finances everything. If you've got if you use $100 million insurance, you're never going to lose that $100 million tomorrow. Yeah, so he's used that money to start buying these other businesses, knowing that $100 million of insurance is, he might lose 50 or 60 of it, but he's not going to lose all of it in 5 minutes.
That's right.
And he's been able to build this massive amount of scale. The whole scale of America is just, compared to what we do here. And they, as I said, they're open for business. They want you there. They want to help you.
Decision making, is it far swifter than it is here?
Yeah. And they haven't got the regulations on them that we have here. We had to spend a lot of money on, and which is a good thing, on the safety equipment and on the plants.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty gung ho over there with that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a good thing, but I'm just saying that's how they used to operate before. And they're good people. I like them.
You do, do you?
Yeah.
Why hasn't there been another Buffett then?
I think there's a lot of, I'd say, well, Buffett's massive, but there's a lot of, I call them mini Buffets.
But no one's come anywhere near him.
No. He's unique. He's a bit like us. No one else does what he does, but it's staggering. He still lives in the same house.
That's right.
And we drive past it. We're going to have a massive steak where he goes and has a steak.
Well, doesn't he have a car which has got hail damage still?
Apparently.
What's next? Where's the economy going? What are you going to invest in next?
Well, we've obviously been through a period of uncertainty. We've got a few things on the go at the moment. Obviously, it's not appropriate to lead where we're going, but I'd like to think if we could do some of these deals we're working on at the moment. We have some smaller investments that we've put a couple $100 million into agriculture in the last few years, into citrus and table grapes and those sorts of things where there's water. We've had a copper and zinc mine or mines, which with the commodity prices, and unfortunately they weren't very well run there for a while, but again, they're spitting out a huge amount of cash at the moment. We've gone into a business called Aquatic Achievers, which is a swim school, we bought from a gentleman in Rockhampton,
Right.
and we're growing those. If you think about it, most kids in Australia learn to swim.
Yep.
So we think we can do well out of that business. So we haven't been sitting on our haunches waiting for something to happen. As I said, we've got a very good team under Todd that are out there looking at things, and again, we've never borrowed money. Never ever borrowed money until 12 months ago. Soles had never ever borrowed money, but with interest rates the way they are,
Yeah, right.
we're mad not to. We've had people come in knocking on our door. We can borrow money at 3%. Can lend us money at 10 or 12%.
Is that right?
Yeah. Right. We've got to be pretty careful with our DD on it, but you know.
Where do you see inflation coming in?
Well, it's interesting. The experts are saying interest rates and inflation are going to happen for a while, but
Big call.
yeah.
What do you say?
I'm a bit lost at the moment, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, really.
I think we all are. Well, I've never been in this environment before with interest rates where they are. No one has. COVID's come about. We've got uncertainty in China. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty what's going to happen in America with the change of government.
Yeah, were you impressed with that, where that's going or not?
I think it's the same as what's happening in the world. Everybody's spending money like men possessed. I know it's cheap and they're printing money, but it's going to. You'd have to think if interest rates start rising, people have got to start to feel the pinch a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're all in this. No one's been through this environment before. I'm quite amazed when I read and hear some of these people talking what's going to happen. I don't know how they can predict because no one's been in this environment.
Personal question for you.
Yeah.
4 generations?
Yeah.
Pressure?
I don't like the word pressure. I think that's a make-up word.
All right, so, okay, what do you call it then?
Oh, I've been dealt that number. I've got to make it work.
Yep.
The old saying, the first 2 make it and the third pisses it up against the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
We're into the 5th generation, so that's, we're in uncharted waters again. But, I've been very lucky. I was well mentored and well groomed, and I was told how to behave, and not that I always did, but I had good discipline installed in me, and I think I learned a lot of that at boarding school, actually.
Did you really?
Well, in those days, if you stepped out of line, you were
clipped.
Yeah. You learnt respect, And I think our generation have learnt to, if you do well at work, you get promoted, you go up the scale. But there's a bit of this now where you come out of university and you're the managing director tomorrow. You've got to learn the business.
What's a good leader to you then? You must have seen plenty come and pitch themselves as leaders, and you've appointed a few good ones.
You've got a person, and I hope I've been reasonably successful in doing it, is developing a team. Like, as I said before, a board is a team. I think by picking the right people, you've got to listen to everybody's angles, because not everything goes well. We've made mistakes. So you've got to be a mentor, a coach, because you're at the end of the line. I've got no one to fall back on.
Buck stops with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I like to talk to my CEOs and MDs. They are in a lonely position as well. They can't go and talk to their 2IC or 3IC. There's only one person they can come to, is to come to the chairman. So I encourage my guys, and I talk to them regularly on the phone or to have face-to-face meetings, to give them the confidence to make them good leaders, to encourage them. Because, as I said, they can get in a lonely place too.
Yes, and you encourage them to take some pretty big calls, don't you? Well,
you have to when you're a leader. The buck stops with you. I think if you've got a good team around, it makes it a lot easier. And I've been very lucky. I've got a stable marriage. I've been married 47 years, so I've never had to worry about any of those sorts of things. And my kids, touch wood, have all done well. And I've been very lucky what I've done over the years.
You also walk the floor a bit, don't you?
Oh, got to. Yeah. We've just moved new offices.
Yeah.
We were in Pitt Street for 120 years. It was a very sad day when we left, but someone made us a very, very good price. I think it's still the highest price per square metre in Sydney.
All right, okay.
And it wasn't an easy building to get around and talk to. And where now it's open plan, I can walk in every morning when I'm there and have a chat with them and say good day and ask them how they're going. And I think that's important to show that, if anyone wants to come and talk to you. It's a difficult world summing up a leader, and everyone's going to be different in what they do. But I think getting that team together is the main.
So how have you gone then, communicating with you when you think about it? You like to meet people face to face.
Yeah,
You like to look at them, what's going on when you look in their eyes, right?
I love going around a brick plant and talking to the bloke running the bloody brick plant. How you going? And it's so easy now if you're in the southern states because you're either a crow or an eagle or a hawk or somebody.
That's right.
But, I'm happy to chat and I'll go and have a beer with anybody. We don't live in a privileged lifestyle, the Millner family. We're very down-to-earth people. And as I said, I'll go and have a beer or chat with anybody.
Are you going via Zoom now then?
I hate it.
Yeah. You think you're missing out on really?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we're missing that contact. And it's nice after the meeting to have a chat with somebody and ask them how their family is or how their footy team's going or if they've been on holidays. Or I'm a great believer in you work hard when you work, but have a bit of time for a bit of leisure and pleasure.
Fair enough. Where's this economy headed, Robert?
I think the next couple of weeks is obviously going to be fairly crucial with JobKeeper finishing and how and when the banks, if they call some of these loans in.
Yeah.
But, as I said earlier, the housing industry is booming.
But that's going to drive inflation, surely to God, isn't it?
Well, you'd have to think so. More people come back to work, more start spending and driving up inflation.
And then the infrastructure spend is going to have a lag time, so that's not going to be a quick fix at all.
Well, I was just talking to a chap this morning who's one of the biggest bricklayers in Australia. He said it's quieting down in Brisbane and in the CBD, and I have to think too after the what's been going on here at the moment, it's got to quieten down here because, again, we're talking about office space. I wouldn't think anyone's building office space for a while.
That's true.
Unless we get tourists back, there'll be no more hotels or many apartments built, I wouldn't have thought so.
So do you think the powers to be in the governments, state and federal, have really come to grips of what business are dealing with? As you said earlier, what was the number you said you've lost because of university students haven't turned up?
90 million.
90 million.
That's just one little business.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be critical of politicians, but very few of them have worked in the real world. That's just, I don't want to be critical. That's a path they've taken.
Yeah.
But I take my hat off to the hours they work. But at the end of the day, do they really understand business?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
As I think I mentioned earlier, the more people you have in work, the more tax they get, the more government money comes in. To me, it's pretty simple.
But we're not doing it, are we?
No, there's too much politics.
You get to Singapore a fair bit.
Yeah.
Okay. What can we learn from Singapore?
We've got a pharmaceutical interest over there. A chap called Key came to Sydney in 1951 to do his pharmacy apprenticeship and did it with Sol Pattinson and went back to Singapore, very successful, started a chain of pharmacies called Apex Pharmacies. Watson's has since taken them over. And he came back out and said to Jim, would you be interested in a joint venture in Malacca in building a manufacturing facility? So we did, and that is now floated on the Malaysian Stock Exchange. So I go over 5 or 6 times a year for board meetings, and it's a very good place to do business, very safe, encouraging.
Yeah.
A lot of incentive for business coming in.
Yep.
But they're in a really bit of a sorry side at the moment because most of their workforce comes in from Malaysia, and Malaysia's full of COVID apparently.
So standing back then, we're looking at, opportunities for Australia on the global stage to really play our hand. Where should we play? And also, second part of the question, where's China going to take us?
Well, we're basically a commodity exporting country, and we're having a good ride at the moment on commodities. And if you believe what the experts are telling us, we're in for a few years of high commodity prices. As I mentioned, we've got copper, which is going to be used for electric vehicles.
Yes.
Nickel, zinc, these types of cobalt, lithium, all these types of products. And we're lucky, and we're very good at what we do in mining. Agriculture is very strong. We're very good at agriculture. So on a commodity front, I think we're in good shape. But the second part of your question is a lot of it goes to China.
Well, we buy a lot of steel back from them, don't we?
Yeah. So I'm a great believer. I think India is going to be the powerhouse. I was only talking to someone the other day, how do we invest in India and make money going forward. So Japan, I know I'm jumping around a little bit
No, that's
here.
right. Yeah.
The stats are telling us that Japan is going to go from 125 million people to 100 million people by 2050. And China is going to have the same problem because they've had this one-child policy, whereas India haven't had these policies. So you're going to see a dramatic surge in growth. And people that were there 2 years ago now because of COVID were saying that they're starting to build high-rise apartments. The roads are starting to be built. So you're going to start to see India, I think, in years to come, become a real powerhouse. And they're not as aggressive as the Chinese.
What is Soul Patch doing there?
In India, nothing.
You going to? You building those relationships?
We've had quite a few dealings with them over the years through coal.
Yeah.
So there are...
It's challenging, isn't it?
Well, you said that, not me.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. It's a different culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah, different culture. And same as the Chinese are difficult to deal with. And I think one thing we've learnt, and I think some of that I've learned it in Singapore, is when you deal with the Japanese, and of course we sell a lot of coal in Japan, is its relationships. And when you're dealing with foreign people, it's all you need to build up relationships.
Yeah. Now, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, you're pretty much painting us out as a commodity country.
Australia.
Yeah. So, and the government knows that, and the government's going to pump that through for the next few years to win a few elections, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Where's phase two? Like you talk, where's manufacturing going to exist? You've already talked about the price of energy.
We've priced ourselves out of existence, unfortunately, on our wage costs. We can't compete. The car plant they had down at Geelong down there. Bloke sweeping the floor was on $120,000 a year. And the scale. I think last time I was in America, someone told me the smallest run they had in America was making a Ford line of 500,000 cars. It was the lowest.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So, we were producing, 50, 60,000 cars. So on our costs, I don't know how we get, I think technical things we can do very well at. But,
but can we? Can we actually, from your side of things, can we actually make a buck out of it, or do we have to go to the US to make the money out of it?
I'm old. I'm not up to speed as much as I probably should be on a lot of technology, but I think there's a good avenue there for us to do well.
Okay.
I know through TPG the technology that's coming.
What about the health sector? Where do you see that going?
Again, it's a difficult sector. We've just had this Royal Commission into the aged care.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of us have been at the stage where we've put aunts or uncles or parents into these nursing homes. You wouldn't put a dog in some of them.
That's right.
I don't know why it's taken them so long to realise that what's wrong with it, but again, you got to pay a lot of people to look after somebody, and labour's not cheap. It's just difficult to put your money into something that, with a lot of people, how are you going to get a return out of it?
So where do you stand on the whole debate around immigration then?
I think we need we've got to get more people in here, but we've got to get people with skills.
And where would you put them? Are you going to put them in Sydney and Melbourne like we seem to do every time we open our, and just populate the city and never have any other support?
Yeah.
And okay, you go to the bush on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
How bad is it out there?
Well, while you're asking that question, I was just thinking that, for example, Cowra, where I have properties, beautiful hospital, big hospital, probably half full. And I've been maintaining for a long time that there should have been incentivising people to go to regional. Unfortunately, we haven't got a rail system, but the trucks run up and down the Newell Highway and the Pacific Highway. So whether you're in land on the Newell Highway, you can get produce and equipment up and down from Sydney to Brisbane and then to Adelaide. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be populating. And it's cheaper. We've got a house in Sydney for $2 million. You can go there and buy a very good house for $400,000 or $500,000.
But if I'm not a cocky, running the farm, how am I going? I'm struggling, aren't I? Majority of Australia out in the bush.
Yeah, there are some good businesses out there. There's some good business abattoirs, those types of businesses, furniture businesses that are supplying, as you said, farmers.
Yeah, okay.
But there's no reason why there shouldn't be more those sorts of businesses out in those regional areas. And you go to a Tamworth, Dubbo, Orange, Bathurst, Wagga now,
Yep.
you've got everything there. There's universities there,
That's
good
right.
medical facilities.
Yep.
So there's no reason why we shouldn't be populating those areas.
Robert, a little while back you mentioned that you didn't go to university.
Yep.
And you're seeing the best of the best coming out of universities and the young people pushing their ideas to get investments from you. What's your thoughts on education?
Going back to the first point, when I didn't have a tertiary education, there was only virtually Sydney University and Macquarie Uni and University of New South Wales had only just started. So there wasn't not that I was ever interested or wanted to go to university, because I was when I was offered that when I was younger to go and work with a stockbroker, I jumped at that. But I think today there's probably too many kids at university that shouldn't be at university. Too many kids being pushed to stay on after year 10. And one of the things in some of the businesses that we're in, they can't get apprentices. So why aren't we incentivising kids after year 10 to become a bricklayer or a plumber or a whatever?
Sparky.
Yeah. And they can earn very, very big money. They're outdoors and they're not in front of one of the screens all day, which is, can't be doing people any good. For example, last week in North Queensland, they're crying out for block layers.
Is that right?
Because up in North Queensland, there's no clay, and now with the cyclones, all the buildings now out of block, reinforced block, and the builders up there are all complaining they can't get block layers. And most trades down here in the Sydney and Melbourne are the same, can't get people.
So we're not having the debate properly about the value of moving on, making yourself your own life at the age of 16 as opposed to 18, 19, 20.
Well, yes, but that's a very valid point. But if you do one of these courses at university, hey, what job are you going to go into? Like,
no guarantees out there at the moment.
And you're assured of, if you're, as I said, being an apprentice. And again, there should be incentives for business to employ apprentices.
Couldn't agree more. Sport.
Yep.
Pretty big factor in your life.
Yeah, I've always been involved. Played a lot of cricket in my day, a lot of rugby. My wife tells me I watch too much now on the weekends, but sport is a great, particularly I think if you're in a team, it builds a team. I was never a swimmer or an athlete, but now I've had a lot of fun out of playing team sport and being involved with guys. I still see a lot of them. I used to play cricket and football with them, and it's no different to a board. You're in a team. You've all got to work together and pull together, and we're very lucky in Australia that the climate we've got, we can sort of watch anything at any time.
Well, it teaches you a lot about values and character, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In your business life, is your word your bond? Is that how the ethos of the Soul Pat's business?
Yeah, I'd like to think of people. Rob Millner's been a very trustworthy, respectful person. That his word is his word. Like, I'm happy to shake hands with somebody on a deal, and I'll stick to it.
Robert, we've covered off a lot today.
Yeah.
But you haven't covered off any mistakes you've ever made.
Well, we've all made mistakes, every one of us. I'll give you an example of probably the worst one we made. Someone bought us a company called Balfour's. Anyone who lives in South Australia would know who Balfour's are. They're a famous confectionery company, cakes, cookies, all those types of things. Very, very, they would be the brand in South Australia. And we thought with the expansion of supermarkets, and it would be a good business to go into. Unfortunately, we didn't manage that business very well. And at the end of the day, Coles and Woolies screwed us down too much, and we couldn't make it work. So that's probably the biggest mistake, and I think we all learned a lot from that. We probably didn't do our due diligence as well as we should have. And again, the business that we bought didn't have the management in there that could run that business successfully.
Do people take accountability when you're going through a look at the failure?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we've all made mistakes. It's part of life. It wouldn't be anyone listening to this that hasn't made a mistake in their life. You've got to be man enough to fess up and say, I made this bad mistake or I did that.
You're naturally born risk taker?
Obviously, but a conservative one. No one wants to blow a company up. and a lot of people. You have a look over the last 30 years, BHP nearly went to the ball.
Yeah.
Westpac nearly went to the ball. Most of our big companies have been 5 minutes away from cracking. We've never been in that position. We've always been in a strong position, even though we've made the odd mistake.
So what motivates you, Robert, at the end of the day? Like you've done obviously financially well personally. You've got good friends, and yet you're still coming in working these hours. You still want to do that next deal. What drives you?
I enjoy it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't. I enjoy it. I guess I'm fortunate in a lot of ways. I'm not actually employed by anybody, so my hours are mine. COVID's made it changed my lifestyle dramatically. I used to do a lot of travelling before COVID, as I mentioned, particularly since we bought that American business. I go to Asia, which wasn't bad. I used to take my wife twice a year and we go to Bali for a long weekend. And, obviously, when you've got Australia-wide businesses, the board of API, I used to travel quite a bit. New Hope, up and down to Brisbane. And obviously Brickworks is a national business. So I was away at least 2 weeks every month. So, I enjoy it and I love meeting people. I'm happy to talk to anybody and try and learn something from them.
So when you call it a day, what's success going to look like then?
Oh, if I can leave the company in a better state than what it was when I started, I'll be very happy. I'm not sure whether my wife's waiting for that day or not, but anyway.
Fair enough. Robert, if you were looking back at that young man who was tapped on the shoulder by Uncle Jim to come and join that board all those years ago, what advice would you give him today?
Do what you've done. I've got no regrets of what I've done. As I said before, I've had a wonderful life. I've been in a very good position and hopefully I've taken advantage of it. Again, I've had good support from family, particularly my wife and family. But I think I've probably been a bit conservative. I think there's probably some things we probably should have done that we haven't done. As I said, up until recently, we never borrowed money. But you've got to look at our track record. The business is bigger and better than when we started. I've had some fantastic people that have put that into place for me. But we haven't blown the place up. I'm sure the press would love to read the fourth generation chairman's blowing the place up. But we've gone about our thought processes and our investments in a very methodical way. As I said before, we haven't always made the right decisions. We've made some bad mistakes, but at the end of the day, we've made more good ones than bad ones. And we're going along very well.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to No Limitations.